1, the Village of Silverton acknowledges the Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories we stand. No addition of late items. Can I get somebody to move an adoption of the agenda? Councillor Broughton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. All in favor? Carried. Adoption of the minutes. Can I do this as a block, Catherine? Okay, for March 12th Committee of the Whole, and April 16th Committee of the Whole. Can I somebody move that? Councillor Denbach, seconded by Councillor Broughton. All in favor? Carried. Okay, we have a delegation tonight. We have Scott from True Consulting going to do the floodplain mapping project. Okay. Sure, yeah, just so the people online can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Perfect. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the flood hazard mapping project that we've been working on for the village. I think you're probably aware that it's a joint venture between New Denver and Silverton, and it's funded by the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. And the purpose of this work is to develop flood hazard mapping to help the village with future emergency preparedness and to provide some base information that the village can use in developing a flood management bylaw in the future. So that's kind of the intent. There was a lot of work that's gone into the background for this. There's kind of 3 supporting reports that feed information into this flood hazard mapping. There was geomorphology work. Actually, I'm going to take one step back. The focus of the work is on the 2 major sources of flood hazards for the village. So one being Slocan Lake and the other being Silverton Creek. So we're not looking at small tributaries or streams or seasonal flows or where does the rain go when it runs through the village. It's not drainage through the streets. We're specifically looking at the creek and the lake. And so to assess those things, there was geomorphology work done on the creek by Palmer Environmental. And so they looked at landforms and how the creek processes could impact flood hazards. And the key finding from that report is that, you know, there is these potential for debris floods to happen. And so our design flows get bulked up by 10% to account for branches and tree trunks and sediment that comes down with the creek during these big flows. Another thing that we looked at for the creek specifically was the flows, obviously, trying to come up with a design flow. So there's no flow gauge on Silverton Creek. And in order to come up with a flow, estimate a flow, we analyzed data from 4 different creeks in the region and used that information to estimate what's likely happening in Silverton Creek based on the sizes of the watershed. And so I don't know, Catherine, if you want to skip ahead a few slides to one more. Yeah, maybe back one from there. Yeah, that's good. So that slide is showing the area, and once we had this design flow for the creek, then we tried to apply a climate change factor to it. And to do that, one of the key pieces of information to understand is that on a smaller watershed like Silverton Creek, it's heavily influenced by rain. So the snowmelt brings the creek flows up in the spring, but the peak flows that happen are rain-induced. And so on that figure there, that bottom graph, you can see those spikes sticking up. Those are over the course of 2 years. That's Caslow River. And those spikes sticking up are the rain-induced peak flows. And so it's really important because those things happen over the course of hours, not days or weeks or months, but hours. So that's kind of the time scale that we're looking at for the creek for the peak flows. And when we looked at the climate models, And we applied that to this local creek. We increased the creek flow by a factor of 70%, 70, from now to the end of the century. And then on top of that, we add that 10% bulking factor for debris flows. And the resulting design flow for the creek is about 125 cubic meters per second. That's like a climate adjusted end of century 1 in 200 year flow. So a flow that will have a probability of happening once every 200 years on any given year by the end of the century, if that makes sense. If you want to flip ahead a couple of slides, Catherine, we then take that flow and we route it through town through a model that we've created of the ground surface and the channel in town. And the 200-year flow mostly is contained by the banks of the channel, but there is some spillage on the upper edge of town. There's like a low-lying road on the south bank of the creek, and so a little bit of flow escapes the creek there, and this image shows where that flow could go as it runs through town. Main thing to point out by this is that it's a pretty small portion of that overall flow. Like in that 1 in 200 year flow event, the amount of flow that escapes that creek bank there is less than 1% of the total flow. And so we're not recommending that the village look at that as a flood hazard, because the amount of water that's coming out of there during that design event is such a small percent. But we are recommending that the village looks at options to mitigate that so that there's less risk to the properties that could get wet during an event like that. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So 1% of 129 cubic meters per second is still 1.29 cubic meters per second.
Yep.
That's still not insignificant amount of water.
That's right. It's not insignificant. It's probably 1,200 liters, 300 gallons a minute, 300 gallons a second, right?
That's still a pretty good flush.
It's a pretty good flush, yeah. The areas on that map that are blue are the inundated areas. And those pockets of water that run through the village are 4 to 6 inches deep. So, yeah, they're not insignificant. If there's structures, homes that have basements, they'd see water in them. So that's why we're recommending that the village does look at options to mitigate it. But we don't want to include it as a part of the flood hazard area. I think it's unrealistic because if you flip ahead another slide, I think one more. Yeah, when we're looking at these flood hazard, go back to that one, Catherine. When we're looking at these flood hazard areas, the dashed line on there is the blue inundation surface. And then what we do is we add 2 feet of freeboard onto it vertically, and then and that's the red line on there. And then we take that line and we project it out horizontally until it hits higher ground. So you can imagine if you had this bit of water running through town and you added 2 feet onto it and projected it out, it would cover the entirety of the south half of the community, which is unrealistic and not appropriate for flood hazard identification. So we're not proposing to include that flow as part of the flood hazard mapping. Yep.
And as you said, those peaks are really quick and diminish probably just as quickly. So it's not like it's going to be weeks and weeks of sustained flooding. It'll be a flush.
These are hours. Yeah, hours.
Worst case scenario.
That's right. 1 in 200 year, yep. Climate adjusted to the end of century. You got it.
Thank you.
But the red line you can see on there, the other thing that's important is that during a flood event, we anticipate or prepare for dikes eroding. So dikes are there to mitigate flood hazards, but they don't eliminate them. And so that's why the red line projects right through the dikes out until it hits a higher ground. And so on the flood hazard map, when you look at that, you'll see that for the most part, that flood hazard area is still within the creek corridor, but when it gets down closer to the lake, it fans out as it approaches the lake, and that's because there's lower lying land beyond the dikes as it gets down to the lake, if that makes sense. So that's the creek. The lake is a little bit different beast because it's such a larger catchment area. And so for the lake, we analyzed data from Slocan River because there is flow data on Slocan River. There is some lake level data, but it's not a large data set. And so we looked at the flows from Slocan River and tried to assess them from a similar climate change lens. And because it's such a larger catchment that is not impacted by these rainfalls, that occur over the course of hours, the lake peak flows, or the river peak flows, are dictated by snow melt, which happens over the course of weeks. And so the climate models show that those river flows will not increase towards the end of the century. They'll broaden out, they'll start happening sooner in the spring, there'll be more melt happening in the fall, but the peaks, which is what we're concerned about, don't increase. And so our conclusion is that if the river flows are not increasing, then the lake level will also not increase as a result of climate change, because those two things are directly related. The lake rises, the flow going to Slocan River increases. So for the lake level, we're just sticking with the basically a present day flow, or a present day lake level, but 1 in 200 year, without a climate change factor applied to it. But then what we are doing is we're applying wind and waves onto the lake, because those are realistic flood hazards. I'm sure you've all seen significant waves on the lake, and we've assessed how those waves, what wave heights could be achieved as they approach the shore around Silverton, and looked at a couple of different scenarios based on the shape of the shoreline, whether it's a shallow slope or a steep bank. And the steep bank, you have to think of waves as energy, and so when they hit a steep bank, they run up higher because it's like hitting a wall. Whereas if they hit a shallow slope, they kind of break onto the shallow slope and fall. And so the northern half of the community, kind of north of 6th, has a steeper slope, and so it has a higher wave run-up. And everywhere south of 6th is shallower slopes, and so it has a lower wave run-up. And so those wave run-up areas are also identified on the flood hazard map as a light blue shaded area. So I don't know, Catherine, if maybe you want to bring up the flood hazard map and I can just point those things out. I don't know if everyone can see that on their screens. I know it's tough to see on the big screen. But the dark blue outline is basically the flood hazard area around the creek. And you can see that that dark blue line fans out as it approaches the lake. And so those properties would all be a part of a flood hazard area. And then along the lake shore, that dark blue line is basically the 200-year lake level with 2 feet of freeboard added onto it. And then the light blue shading, which projects a little bit beyond the dark blue line, is the wave run-up area. And so if the village is looking to do floodplain or flood management bylaws in the future, this would feed into that process, and you would look at both of those hazards along the lake shoreline. You'd be looking at the blue line as kind of a still water flood elevation that doesn't just happen for hours, but happens for days and weeks. And you'd be looking at this wave run-up hazard as something that can be happening for numbers of hours, but it has energy involved with it. And so both of those things have to be considered when someone's going to develop along the lake shore. On the creek, it's specifically an elevation thing with the flood hazard area and the water level of the creek. And so next steps for the village, I guess, on this is, like I said, there was recommendations to look at mitigation options for that low-lying road up on the upper edges of the village. Also, because the wave run-up areas, they're variable. So depending on what you're planning to do on a property and where it is in relation to the shoreline, it has a different impact, because the closer you are to the lake, the more energy the wave has, the higher it can run up. And so it's probably worthwhile for the village, instead of diving straight into a flood management bylaw, to look at some options that would play into that bylaw, where you could provide homeowners with information on scenarios. If they're building, you'd probably define a setback from the lakeshore, where you don't want anybody building. You create a riparian area, basically, and you don't want anyone building within 10 meters or 15 meters of the lakeshore. And you could look at options where, if someone wants to build right up against that setback, what elevation do they have to build to if they want to put a armored slope in front of their house versus a concrete wall versus something else. And so that sort of information could be looked at, and that way the public would have these options to rely on, instead of having to do their own analysis when they are going to take out a building permit. Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I think that was pretty full report. Clarence, any comments?
No questions.
No questions, comments? Don? Do you have your microphone on?
No, there's so much to try to take in. But I think I'm understanding it. And one thing is, have we ever had a flood like what it showed from the road up above, outside of our boundaries?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I lived here my whole life, and the only place I remember is when it broke out into the bay down below here, nearer to the mouth of the creek. But I don't remember. I think I can remember once, before they actually raised that road slightly before, water covering the road a little bit, but I don't remember it ever coming into town.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the road is not consistent, and so we looked at a few different areas just to try and get a sense of what that flow is looking like and how deep it is in different scenarios. And there's parts of the road where the water is just cresting over the edge of the road, but then the road's tipped, and so it's pooling, a foot deep or 2 feet deep on one side, and then it shallows back up. So there is variability in it for sure. The modeling shows that it starts to overtop in a 1 in 50 year flow, something like that. So it might not be a flow that any of us have seen if it's something that only happens once every 50 years.
Great. Any further questions? No further questions? Thank you.
Perfect.
You don't have to stay if you don't want to. You can leave if you'd like. Okay, on to the next. We have a recommendation that the Village of Silverton gives approval in principle for the Shakespeare by the Shore to hold performances at this Slip Day Park on June 24th to the 27th. Oh, yep. Okay, I will go back to that one, sorry. The dike repair project. So we have a recommendation that council proceed with development of detailed design and required engagement and permitting for repairs to the damaged portion of the dike located downstream of the highway bridge over Silverton Creek. Somebody move that? we can still have discussion if somebody moves it. Councillor Broughton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. And discussion?
Okay, so we are talking only about stuff from below the highway bridge.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Which part of it is what needs to be repaired downstream, or is it pretty much everything? Which part of the dike is it downstream that we need to repair, or is it pretty much the whole thing needs work?
We will let our CAO answer that.
There are some sections that are quite close to the creek mouth. I'm not looking at the correct map here, but I believe that it is kind of between this 544 and 542 on the map that I'm showing up there. So downstream of the village works yard, but upstream of the day park.
I think that's the area that regularly breaches when we have the spring runoff. But that would, I think that's right around that area.
I'm wondering how much of our problem would be solved by fixing the mouth of the creek, so that we don't have all that buildup down there and the flow can keep going where it should instead of spreading out so much. I don't know if we can answer that right now or not, but it's something I'd like to look into if we can. I know it's time sensitive and whatnot as far as spawning and all that, but I'd like to see us. I'm thinking start with the mouth of the creek to fix all our problems with the diking and the creek. Just my thoughts.
CAO Holloway?
I do have the map up on the screen now that shows the location of the repair section. So we're looking at the one that's furthest left. That is, my cursor is hard to see.
So that's in the orange kind of
Yes.
orangey area?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Is that where it's sloughing?
I believe that there was some damage to the riprap.
Okay.
So that is likely.
Yeah. So that would be behind where Cashmere's place is.
So
Councillor Denbach?
further to Don's question then, has there been any discussion about doing anything at the creek mouth to let things move a little faster?
Just what we mentioned when we first mentioned the project, but then we found out what the project was and it wasn't anything to do with the mouth of the creek. So that was something that it was brought back to us to approach later in the future, but it wasn't something that was.
Okay. Yep.
Do we know what it would take to get that, not necessarily included in any of this, but get that dealt with?
I don't think so. At this point, we don't have any plans or anything on anything down there. Okay, so the recommendation on the table is that we proceed with the development of the detailed design and required engagement and permitting for repairs to damaged portions of the dike located downstream of the highway bridge over Silverton Creek. Any further discussion? Councillor CAO Holloway?
I can just add that this would be for the next phase of the application. I think that if council directs staff to take that to go in that direction, we will also continue to discuss options with Regional District of Central Kootenay staff to explore what might be done collaboratively to protect the other parts of town that are more upstream that might be affected by a breach upstream, and how we would look at mitigation efforts there. But that I think is going to require some discussion with them since it's work that's technically outside of the village's boundaries.
Okay, any further discussion? No further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, on to the other one. Park use request for the Shakespeare by the Shore. That the Village of Silverton gives approval in principle for Shakespeare by the Shore to hold performances at the Slip Day Park on June 24th to 27th, 2025? 2025? Oh, 2026, next year. Okay. Okay, way ahead. Okay, good. I thought that was just a typo. And that the Village of Silverton issue a noise bylaw exemption permit for the Shakespeare by the Shore event at the Day Slip Park on 24th to 27th of June. Somebody move that? Councillor Denbach, seconded by Councillor Broughton. Any discussion? Councillor Broughton, go ahead.
Yeah, if they're only going till 9, is that contravening our bylaw, or is it more for a volume thing during their show?
I can speak to that. The bylaw prohibits causing noise which disturb the quiet rest or enjoyment of people in the neighborhood or in the vicinity. So I think out of an abundance of caution, if it's something that council wants to see happen, obviously it's not a silent production, but I think that out of an abundance of caution, if it's something that council wants to see happen in the community, it would be good to indicate that very clearly by formally waiving the requirements of the noise bylaw for the event.
Councillor Broughton?
Yeah, that makes sense, and that way the neighbors too, if they know that there's a bylaw or that we're allowing it that way, then they'll know in advance enough that it shouldn't be a big problem for people. So I see why that's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? See you all away.
Hold it a second.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that it's been brought to our attention that one of the conditions for the Silverton Lake Arts Council to obtain the grant that they're seeking to fund the Shakespeare by the Shore production is that there has to be some in-kind support from the local government. And so I'm proposing that we're going to provide in-kind support in the form of use of municipal parklands for the purposes of having this event take place. Just wanted to make that really clear to council since it was new information that has just been brought to our attention.
Okay, thanks.
And they need that by the end of this month, correct? A letter of support?
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, on to the Wild Safe BC program that the Village of Silverton provide. No, I keep jumping ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, that the community radon testing, that the Village of Silverton applied to participate in the 100 radon test kit challenge program in 2025. Get somebody move that? Councillor Denbach, seconded by Councillor Broughton. Any discussion? I can give a little bit of background information on this. The Village of Caslow just did this not too long ago, and the Village of Nakusp, I believe, just participated in this within the last year or two. It's a free to the community. The Village of Silverton distributes the radon test kits, and you do the test at home, you send them back, and then they get an idea of what your community is like for radon. No cost to the village, and I'm going to sit in on a session with them in May if council decides to go that way. Any further discussion? Councillor Broughton?
Yeah. Have we had any, has any radon testing been done anywhere in Silverton that we know of yet?
Probably in personal houses, yeah.
But we wouldn't know the results then. Because I know this radon ends up costing a whole bunch when you build a house because of the way they make you deal with it. So I do believe we need to find out And probably there's nothing we could do about changing the regulations, even if there is no sign of radon anywhere in the area. But yeah, I think we probably should find out. And if it's not going to cost us, then let's take advantage of it.
I think in the end, it helps our residents to get an idea of what's going on in the village. Councillor Campbell?
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, 2025 Wild Safe BC program. The Village of Silverton provide up to $1,500 in funding towards the 2025 Wild Safe BC program. Moved by Councillor Broughton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. Any discussion?
I can't find the place I was looking for, but what is the Wild Safe? I noticed somewhere it said, well, I guess it was in our recommendations. We could do 1,000 or 15. Is it 15? The Village of New Denver is requesting we pay 15.
So we have the options here to participate in the program only if New Denver will accept a $1,000 contribution. New Denver will be advised of council's decision. If a $1,000 contribution is acceptable, Silverton will participate. If not acceptable, Silverton will not participate in the 2025 program. Is that the option that you wanted to move?
Sorry. No, I was just kind of wondering what it's. The 15 is what New Denver was requesting, or where did that? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I did read all this earlier, but now I've somewhere lost what it was good. And the recommendation is we go with the 15.
The recommendation on the table right now is 15. If you want to amend that to 1,000, we can move that one.
Where does that money come from? Straight out of our funding? Somewhere or okay.
Yeah. Councillor Denbach, go ahead.
In the second recommendation of the second option there, what's the rationale behind doing a conditional situation like that?
It had been discussed during budget deliberations, sort of how much value was the Village of Silverton getting from participating in the Wild Safe program. A couple of things to note. There was a significant increase in the amount of contribution from the community that was required this year. It went from a $4,000 contribution to a $6,000 contribution. And I don't think that there was any warning to any of the participating municipalities around that. So I think it came as a surprise to New Denver that this is something that has been going on for a long time and people have been budgeting the $1,000. So I think that that's unfortunate, but I understand that the costs are increasing for delivering programs everywhere. So I can understand that. I think that the other thing that I heard from council during budget deliberations was that often a lot of the programming took place in New Denver rather than in Silverton. And I was pleased to notice that the draft work plan that had been provided for this year does include a much more even distribution of activities. That the plan is to deliver a significant portion of the programming in Silverton this year. So I think that there are some reasons when I looked into the matter a little bit more that would support making the full amount of the contribution this year. But I did want to give council some options that reflected the discussion that I had heard at the table.
So if I'm not mistaken, because it's not entirely clear to me anyhow, what we're saying in 2 is we'll only participate if New Denver participates, more or less.
New Denver has already submitted a grant application and they've been approved for funding. So they're going ahead. They're just hoping for some partners in the project because otherwise they'll be on the hook for the full amount of the $6,000. So based on my discussions with New Denver, I understand that Slocan, New Denver, and McCusk have all agreed to participate. So Silverton is the last municipality to confirm.
Mhm.
So I don't know whether New Denver would accept Silverton's participation with a lower amount, but that's going to be something that's probably going to have to go back to New Denver Council, and there'll be a process around that.
Budget for this in our budget already, or has it?
There are funds that we can include in budget depending on what direction council decides to take tonight. We will make sure that there are funds in budget to cover this.
I would think then if as Catherine said, there's going to be more programming in Silverton too, maybe let's go with the 1,500 and see if we can kind of closely monitor what we're getting for our money. And then, next year we'll probably have the same thing come up at some point, and we'll have a much better idea of what we're basing it all on.
I'd just like to add my comments. I think it's a good program. I would like to see some more going on here, and maybe if we can work with them to do a little bit more in our campground too, that would be a great thing to get our campground attendants on board too. Any further discussion? No further discussion? So we have a recommendation that Village of Silverton provide up to $1,500 in funding towards the 2025 Wild Safe BC program. All in favor? Great. Okay, the 2025 Ready Grant allocations. That the Silverton Council recommend to the Regional District of Central Kootenay that the total of $35,289 of the 2025 Ready Grant funds be allocated as described in the agenda package. Somebody move that? Councillor Barton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. Any discussion? No discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, we have the water well replacements. So if council remembers, we just replaced the pump not too long ago. We've had another pump decide it was going to need to go. We have a recommendation on the table that staff be directed to procure a replacement pump for the number 1 well, including the installation of insulation transformer between the BC Hydro Service and the well equipment at an estimated cost of $65,503 plus applicable taxes, with any cost overruns to be reported to council. Can I get somebody to move that? Councillor Denbach, seconded by Councillor Barton. Any discussion?
We got to have water, and one pump's no good. We got to make sure we always have that backup. So I think it's another one of those where it's a lot of money. We don't have any choices.
Yeah, and I will just comment to the isolation transformer. Sounds like a great thing to buy.
Yeah.
And hopefully we stopped all these surges that keep taking out our infrastructure. Any further discussion? Councillor Denbach? No?
So just like
Councillor.
that price included that surge transformer, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
that
Yeah.
includes that surge isolation transformer.
Okay. So
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay. So we have a councillor absence, that council, we have a recommendation on the table that council authorize Councillor Mills' absence from future council meetings through December 31st, 2025. Can I get somebody to move that? Councillor Barton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. Any discussion? And just to let everybody know, this Councillor Mills works away from home, so he is not always readily available for meetings. This is just so it doesn't trigger a by-election if he runs into too many meetings that he's missing. We still have Councillor Mills and he's welcome at the table. We're not kicking him out. Any further discussion? No further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, we have the RDCK Community Sustainable Living Service, removable of Area K, that the Village of Silverton consent or decline to the request of the Area K to be removed from Community Sustainable Living. I'm going to actually recommend that we decline the request. The recommendation is to decline the request from Area K to be removed from Community Sustainable Service. And if we get somebody to move that motion, I'll explain why. Councillor Broughton, second by Councillor Denbach. Okay, just to go into a little bit on that, I sat in on the meetings for the RDCK the last couple months, and Area K has requested to be removed from that service. In the future, or previous to that, Salmo had requested to be removed from the service. So with Area K removed, this is 2, and they've just recently now had 2 more areas decide that they're removing themselves. So it takes a 2-year process. So they let the service know that they want to be removed, and it takes 2 years for that to go through. So the Area K, it's just finally ended up at the end of the 2 years. So now they're getting the letters from the rest of the service partners. My issue with this is the more partners that leave the service, the harder it will be for the rest of the partners to leave that service. Because that service kind of spreads into so many different areas. For example, there's one project in there right now, the path between New Denver and Silverton. Silverton is the only one on the Community Sustainable Living Service. New Denver is not a partner on that service. So it would be Silverton and the rest of the partners dealing with that project. They're realizing that a lot of their services and their projects are going into areas that are not always part of the service. So they're trying to find a way to maybe roll that back into their general government and then just distribute it through that. They're in the process of now coming back to the board with some ideas on how they can continue with that service, or if they decide to dissolve the service. It takes 2 years to dissolve the service, though, just to let everybody know. Any further discussion? And just to clarify, even if we do decline to give this letter, they're not too sure what's going to happen, because there are other areas that have declined also for the same reasoning that I've just given. Any further discussion? No further discussion? All in favor of to decline the request that Area K be removed? Carried. Thank you. So correspondence for information. Can I get somebody to, do we have to move? No, just
need a resolution.
Okay. Would anybody like to pull anything to talk about? Nope. Okay, on to council reports. I've given my report. There was a couple things I wanted to mention. I had the meeting with CIFCO, and we are trying to get back into that partnership with them. For the 2025 program, it doesn't look like we'll be able to, but I'm still trying to work on them to get our boards back up there. Have little green signs there saying our low fire rating would be awesome to have going again. And on a side note to that, as part of that meeting, BC Parks was there, and we talked about the Valhalla Park campgrounds across the lake. And I was trying to get a timeline as to when they were going to open those. They've got 3 of the areas south towards Slocan, the campgrounds that are opening. But our north ones, it doesn't sound like it's going to open anytime soon. In May, they want to start some assessments, and then they'll go from there. But it's not looking like our area of the park will be open this year at all. Other than that, I have no other further. Councillor Broughton?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit for the curling club meeting that was on April 11th. They did a little recap of the write-up ceremony about what went right and wrong, and they're trying to figure out when is the real best date for that, so they can kind of set it in stone, I guess. There are a couple of the things they're trying to do is fix or get a new mine sign. Canada Day, of course. The fireworks, they're planning to spend $5,000 to $6,000. There's going to be a dog show this year, $200 in prizes. They, in the future, not for this year, I don't think it is, but are wondering about grant and aid in the campsites. I thought that was already something we're doing, but anyway. And one thing I'd like to point out is, like so many outfits, they're losing people. There's very few volunteers left. We really need to try to help them find some younger folks from the area. I got into volunteering when I was 12 years old at May Days years ago, so you don't find many young ones anymore looking to get into that, but that's what they need, or we're going to lose these things. And a lot of people don't realize just how much the community club does, but as I say, they want to fix up, they want to paint up the equipment that is up there at the gallery, and all that time takes money, and a lot of it volunteers. So if you could think of anybody who might be interested, talk to them, explain how if we lose this, we lose a lot more than people. It's not just Canada Day or July 1st, I mean. No, right, Canada Day. Anyway, yeah, so if you can think of anybody, like I say, and even ourselves, my main problem is my body, but there is times I'll let them know that specific, like the painting of the equipment and sanding down of it and whatnot. Yeah, I can do that. Depends how many hours. I just don't want to commit to anything major. But even if any council members are interested, let them know. I think that's about all I did last month. Well, except for our regular meetings.
Okay, thanks, John. Councillor Dunn?
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Okay, on to administration department reports. We have a final report for the CBT grant for the Silverton fire suppression. Silverton Gallery fire. Do we need a resolution or anything? No.
These are just
For our information?
Information to let you know what's been sent off into the world
Perfect.
with your name on it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for getting that done. I know we had a few extensions on that one, so it's nice to see that one get out the door. Any questions on either of those reports? The Indigenous engagement funding report? No questions? Okay, on to bylaws. Okay, so we have bylaw 1, that fees and charges bylaw number 550/2025 be adopted.
Dang.
Yeah.
Can we just shut this air conditioning off here?
I tried.
Yeah.
I shut it off. It's off.
Yeah.
It's cold. I get it. Okay, so we have that recommendation on the table be adopted. Can I get somebody to move that?
This is the,
For the fees and charges bylaw 550?
yes, I'll move.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Broughton. All in favor?
Discussion.
Can we discuss that or no? On the adoption. But we're going to move on to the second motion, yeah. I think that's what he wants to discuss on.
Okay, let's
Okay.
let's say that's true.
Okay, so we need to move that first adoption and then,
Okay.
okay, all in favor? Carried. So then we have a recommendation that staff be directed to prepare a report to council with options for increasing rental fees for municipal facilities. Somebody move that, please. Councillor Broughton, seconded by Councillor Denbach. Any discussion? Councillor Denbach?
So what are these two steps? I don't quite understand the difference. What's the first one? We adopt, the adoption is what relative to the second one?
The adoption is that we adopted the fees that we planned in the first three readings. And this was the addition that we talked about, how we wanted to increase the rental rates. So this is giving direction now to staff to come back to council with these options.
And we're distinguishing between fees and rental rates?
See, Ava?
Not really. I think that the important thing to recognize is that we were trying to get the bylaw adopted because fees that are charged by a municipality need to be charged by bylaw. And those fees that have been being charged for quite some time for renting this building, for example, were not established by bylaw. So we were just bringing ourselves into compliance with the legislation by enshrining in a bylaw what had already been happening. But then as part of that, recognizing that it's going to take a little bit of time to gather and analyze some options for council about recommended rate increases, because there haven't been rate increases in many, many years. But that process is going to take some time. And so we didn't want to wait on adoption of the bylaw until all that work had been done. So it was a two-step process. First, turn it into a bylaw. And then second, direct staff to add up to the list on the work plan to bring back some options about possible increases at a future date.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm still somewhat puzzled by the two-step process. The one seems to bring something into a bylaw process, and then I don't get it.
I think we just had to get back into compliance because we weren't actually in compliance. We didn't have the bylaw made.
I see. So we brought the whole fee structure as it was in, and now we're
moving on to getting direction from staff.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
You're getting closer to gold stars. Like right now, you're kind of hitting silver because at least it's by bylaw. So that's a big step in the right direction. But are they really the fees that council feels are the appropriate fees? There's maybe a question there that needs to be answered still.
Yep. And that process will be another consultation with council as we go.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Councillor Broughton?
No, I was just looking at the fees here and stuff. No, I don't think I have any questions at the moment.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay, we have the 5-year plan and the tax rate bylaw. They're not quite ready to go yet, so we're removing them from the agenda tonight. So that moves us on to public input periods. Jan, did you have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about it when we recess, but I'm going to suggest that maybe towards the end of next week, we want to have a special meeting to present the bylaws and give council an option to go through the final numbers.
Okay. Any questions online? Seeing no questions online, we'll be moving to in camera. Can I get somebody to move the recommendation that we go in camera due to section 90.1 of the community charter? Councillor Broughton, seconded by